right, I think we can get started. So everyone, welcome to the high-resolution vegetation, phenology, and productivity webinar on biodiversity, organized by the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service. I'm Amal Tweeri, and I will go through the agenda for today's webinar. So first and foremost, we'll have some welcoming words, followed by an introduction to HR-VPP given by Bruno Smets from Veto. Followed by that, we will have Lori Gianjacovo talking about the detecting and monitoring habitats. And then finally, we'll see EU Grassland Watch monitoring nature conservation with Stefan Kleeschulte. And of course, as usual, we have a Q&A session at the end. So do add your questions, of course, for the Q&A session. We do have some housekeeping rules to remind you with. So the webinar is being recorded and it is also available later on the EEA YouTube channel. We ask you to follow the general webinar courtesy rules, of course, so please mute your microphone if you're not speaking. And if the floor is given to you, of course, you can speak. We ask you to enter your questions for the presenters through Slido. You have here the QR code, and I will add to the chat the link as well. We will also ask some questions to you, so please check Slido and answer these questions as well. And I would like just to remind you that this is the last webinar of the webinar series, Biodiversity. If you have missed one of the previous one, you can also access them and watch the recording on the EEA YouTube channel. And I can give the floor to Bruno.
Okay, thanks, Amal. So welcome to everybody in this fifth and last webinar on the HR-VPP dataset and its use. So I'll start with giving a very short introduction for those who don't know the HR-VPP dataset yet. So it's part of the pan-European Copernicus biophysical parameter dataset. So you can find the link here. So it's systematic monitoring daily, at least for the state and evolution of the land surface, and it's across the full continent. So VPP stands for, there are two P's in there. So one is phenology, the other one is productivity. So the phenology is really the timing of the development of the photosynthesis. So this means that we will capture visible stages like of the leaf development. So it's bud setting, leaf growth, leaf shedding, etc. And that certainly relates then to the internal plant processes like light, which is affected by light, temperature, water, etc. And then we have the productivity, which is an accumulation of the biomass. So that kind of denotes the plant growth. And often it's also measured with terms as the gross or net primary productivity. It's a suite of products, so it consists not only of one single product. So it starts from the Sentinel-2 time series 10-meter spatial grid, both Sentinel-2A and 2B, level 1C. And at the daily part, at least a set of vegetation indices is calculated. So whenever a scene comes in, the calculation is done immediately. So the data becomes available within 10 or 12 hours. And it consists of a fraction of absorbed photosynthetic analysis, active radiation, the normalized difference vegetation index, the NDVI, well known, the leaf area index, and probably which is less known is the plant phenology index. There is a second part, which is what we call the seasonal trajectories. So that's using a full year of time series data from the PPI, the plant phenology index, and then applying some curve fitting and gap filling techniques to get a 10 daily seasonal trajectory output. And finally, derived from that one, there is yearly also the vegetation parameters, both phenology and productivity, which are extracted for both seasons. Both the seasonal trajectories as well as the VPP parameters, they are processed annually as soon as the data is available, and the data goes until February. So that's why the production or the delivery there is in March. The whole data set has been calibrated against different reference data. So we have been using for the productivity EDICOM variants, so the flux towers, Phenocam, so that's the monitoring of the phenology through two cameras, the greenest part, PEP 725, so that's really ground observation networks by human people who are conducting different leaf stages. And then also for crops, some additional fields have been used for calibrating the data. If you look at the 4 different vegetation indices, so the daily products, then you see there NDVI, FFR, PPI, and LIE. And in this graph, this is one of the examples why we have selected the PPI for this phenology product, because it is the most sensitive for the phenological stages for at least the main land cover types. Here you see an example of the seasonal trajectory. So the black dots are the raw vegetation indices, which have, of course, a little bit of noise. So then this curve fitting and gap filling technique is being done, because the daily is also raw vegetation is also at a kind of an irregular time frame. You also have clouds sometimes, etc. So the dashed box basically gives kind of the curve fitting technique, and the yellow dots are then the regular interval, which comes out as the seasonal trajectories. And derived from that, like I said, the phenological stages, start of season, max season, end of season, etc., are being conducted, which are the green arrows in this graph. So this is just a small kind of animation where you see the PPI seasonal trajectory every 10 days, where you see April, May, June, the values are becoming higher because it's summer in Sweden. And then from August onwards, you see still a couple of fields, typically agricultural fields, which are still active, and then going into December, January again, where there is little or no phenological stage. This is the different parameters. So we talk about 13 different parameters, which are derived for 2 seasons. So you see the start of season date, as well as the V for the value. Same for the end of season, the max date and value, and then a couple of derived parameters like the length, the minimum value, which is kind of the base level in the bottom row of the images. You also see the left and the right slope, which provide an indication on how fast the growing up, or the greening up, I should say, and the foliage stage is going. And then you have the amplitude, the seasonal, and the total production. So the seasonal production is the production between the start and end of season. The total production is across the full cycle. And then there is a 14th layer, which is a quality flag, which provides some additional information on the quality of the product. The start of season, you can also clearly see, at least in the altitude, the influence. So here in the graph, you can see at least that in the elevation, you see that the start of season days is going later and later into the season part of the year. Then the HR-VPP documentation. So if you go to the website, you will find a lot of documents. The starting entry point is always the product user manual, both for the vegetation indices, so the daily product as well as the annual products. If you want to see more details, then you can go into the algorithm details, and there is also the validation detail, which provides you a full report on all the validations conducted. And then to access the data, you have the data access manual, both from a human perspective through the Wikio interface, as well as machine-to-machine scripting. And there is also some tools available through a Git repository that you can use. It's a product which is, like I said, it's Phenology. It's kind of complementary with another product which had to be published, which is almost published. It's HRL crop type, a 10 meter, which provide more details on the crop type part itself, as well as some other expert products. It's also a Copernicus service, so this means that we have the data from 2017 already available, but it will be continued for a lot of more years. So the future prospects is that, of course, the current production will be continued, but also that the above ground biomass will be added. The current kind of productivity layers is kind of an index type of measure for the productivity. But in the future, also the GPP and NPP, which is more biophysical or physical metrics, will be changed. As well as also there has been done recently a reprocessing of the Sentinel-2 archive, so that also will be used at least for doing a full reprocess action. Okay, that's a bit about the introduction. I know it's very fast, but it's yeah, you can read more on the website, and you will hear more in the next presentations on the use.
Thank you, Bruno. So we have the questions already open on Slido. We will close it very soon and you will have a new question popping up. So make sure to check that out. And I think we can move to the second presentation by Bruno and Lori.
Okay, thanks, Amal. So I will start and then Lori will take over. So as you have seen in the previous one, so what is HR-VPP dataset? So we want to explore in this webinar a bit more about how to use it for biodiversity purposes. So we will first explain a bit on biodiversity and essential biodiversity variables, then go into a couple of studies at least, how can we use it for habitat mapping, how to distinguish tree species, where we did a short study at least on Germany, and also how to see at least to monitor the status of peatlands, where we did a short study on Finland. So I think everybody knows the biodiversity problem. So we all have known the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030. We know the IPBES reports, which says that the whole biodiversity is a big issue at the moment. But it also has a complex spatial scaling pattern, temporal dynamics, but still the monitoring data is still sparse in time and also limits only some of the aspects. So that's why biodiversity is an important part. And we need the integration of available and more reliable data from multiple sources to target this challenge of restoring nature and also at least monitoring the schemes by using different biodiversity models. So everything starts from the EBVs, so essential biodiversity variables. So there are 6 classes: genetic composition, species population, species traits. So that's looking at the variability in genetic composition and species population and taxonomic diversity. Then you move on into the community composition, where we look a bit more about the diversity of the organisms which make up the ecosystem. So we look a little bit at the larger scale. And then finally, we have then the ecosystem functioning, which attributes the performance of the ecosystems that result to the activities of the organisms, and the structure, which is more the spatial arrangement of these different organisms. So this is a well-known concept. I've put there also the source on the GeoBon, where you can find more information always on these classes or this topology. So in Europe, there was recently, and it's nearly finished, there was a EuropaBon project which conducted based on these 6 classes a bit on where can satellite remote sensing contribute most. And here you can see that if you look at ecosystem function and structure there, if both satellite remote sensing, both full as well as partially, has a very large contribution on the EBVs which are related to these classes. So that's also where HR-VPP fits in. It could still contribute also to community composition, but it's mainly on ecosystem function, where there is one of the EBVs is terrestrial ecosystem phenology, which is immediately, of course, to be conducted directly from this HR-VPP dataset, but also on ecosystem structure. There is this ecosystem distribution of habitats, which is an important input, and we'll explain a bit more. And I think Stefan also will go further into that route. Then if we then dive into what is ecosystem distribution of terrestrial UNIS habitats, so it's in the terrestrial domain, and this means that it's in terrestrial realm. It's the EBV class ecosystem structure, as I said, and it really presents at least, or provides a geographical or spatial distribution of the habitats across the EU over time at spatial detail between 10 and 100 meters. So this is what was requested by the policymakers every year, and preferably across a typology which is called UNIS habitats, and they want to go to level 3 or level 4. So based on that, there has been a number of studies conducted to use HR-VPP and habitat mapping. So at the bottom part of the image, you see at least that how typically habitats were mapped as where a habitat is suitable to, or an area is suitable at least to provide a certain habitat. Yeah, so species models were used for that, like Maxent and other species models, which were derived from environmental predictors, where abiotic are the limiting factors, and there is where HR-VPP has been used and checked at least on how can it contribute to generate the habitat suitability maps. The second one, that's the top part, is that also for machine learning. More new state-of-the-art machine learning techniques have been used to conduct at least also habitat mapping. So not suitable mapping, but really the categorical classifications for habitat map, where you can derive indicators, policy indicators thereof. And there also that's kind of a combination of optical, radar, and LiDAR Earth observation, as well as this other data where also HR-VPP was added as an additional part. So input part, so one of the important parts in the circle in the middle, blue circle, is that these machine learning, they use all these different input data, which is called predictors in that case, to see, okay, what are the best predictors to distinguish different habitat types. And that's what we will explain a bit more in the next couple of slides. So you see, these are all the predictors. I'm not going to read them all, but there are 5 important categories. So you have topographic predictors like digital elevation model or vegetation height, a number of climate and soil predictors related to mean temperature during the growing season, or soil information like soil bulk density, etc. Then there is a number of temporal data, which is coming directly from the EU, so Sentinel-2 data, which is calculated as annual percentiles, number of indices, both Sentinel-2 and Sentinel-1. And then there is also the contextual box, which is looking at a surrounding box around the pixel of 128 by 128, and characterizing through some vectors at least the context. Yeah. And then the 5th box, where you can see there highlighted, is that related to vegetation. There are 2 sets in the vegetation put in from HR-VPP. So we have 6 VPP annual parameters, as well as 4 images, which are leaf area index images, which have been used, one for every season. So this is an example on what the machine learning is giving. So the feature importance coming out from the machine learning. So out of these, what's typically like 60 kind of predictors which are selected by the machine learning. So you see for level 1, so it's a hierarchical classification. So the first class is a little bit more like a land cover type. So you see there is only leaf area index of July, which is used. But then if you move into the grasslands, so trying to detail in a level 2 the grasslands out for different species, then the LIE is used. In shrubs, you see a little bit more again. There also the VPP season length is coming in. And then in the forest, you see that a lot of parameters are coming. At the bottom part, the graph that shows just from the order of priority. So the left is the highest priority. So the feature which provides most of the contribution to select different forests or distinguish different forest species. And you see there at least the 4 parameters from VPP, as well as the LIE from April in springtime popping up to detect the importance of the species. You can do the same, at least moving down one level further, what we call the level 3. So in trees, this means that you try to distinguish all different broadleafed deciduous tree species, as well as what you see at the top part, as well as the coniferous different forest types. So you see here that more parameters are popping up for the broadleafed, as well as on the right side, you see it for the grasslands, for different grasslands, that if you look at dry grasslands, for instance, there, the VPP season length is popping up, as well as also in the subalpine and seasonal wet grasslands. While, for instance, in the forest fringes, there you see the upslope, because it's a little bit more related to the shrub part. So you see different parameters are selected across the different species types by the machine learning algorithms, the models. So now I hand over to Lori for the second part. Lori?
Yes, hello, thank you. I will start this next part of the presentation by introducing this paper that was conducted by some German authors. So the authors, they try to make a distinction between some forest stands, pure stands, and mixture stands based on extracting vegetation phenology information from Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2 time series, and also some national forest inventories. And we actually wanted to try to see if we can use our HR-VPP parameters to also see a distinction between the responses of different tree species, because this would, if so, it would mean that it would reduce the workload a lot, since you don't have to process entire Sentinel-2 or Sentinel-1 time series and homogenize all the data. And in the lower part of the slide, you can also see that the tree species are linked to certain UNIS typologies. Just to give you an idea that this information on HR-VPP responses might be also interesting to incorporate further into habitat classification. So next slide, please. Yes. So we did some analysis where we derived statistics for each HR-VPP parameter separately, and then see how the data is distributed for all tree species. And here you can see histograms for the 4 important HR-VPPs that were just mentioned by Bruno in the previous slides, that seem to be important by the feature selection in the habitat classification workflows. So these are the slope of the green up period, the season amplitude, the total productivity, and the vegetation value at the max D, which was the max V parameter. And these actually also give quite a pronounced good response in the plots that you can see. So you can see that for pine, for example, pine is also the most dominant species in east of Germany, where we conducted this analysis, this case study. And you can see that it has a left-tailed distribution. And it is, we also plotted for pine the distribution on a secondary axis, which you can see at the right side of each plot, because it is so prominently present in the area. And you can see that the coniferous species, so pine and also spruce, they give a little bit of the same response in certain graphs. But for example, for total productivity, the mean value seems to differ a bit, and the distribution is a bit different. So there is some potential in also distinguishing these two parameters from these two tree species from each other. The deciduous tree species are quite good to differentiate from each other, but they often give quite, they have a large within species variability in their response. But it gives a good indication that coniferous and deciduous species are able to be differentiated from each other based on these HR-VPPs. And also to just make a reference back to the first paper that I introduced earlier, we get some similar results that certain coniferous and deciduous tree species sometimes give the same response. These are, for example, pine and beech. Also, for coniferous species, they often give quite similar results, such as spruce and pine. This is also just linked to similar physiological and phenologically similar, that they are similar species in that case. Okay, if you can go to the next slide, please. So the same analysis we wanted to conduct for the peatlands. So in Finland, you have very many certain type of peatlands. So you have undrained and drained peatlands, and within these two categories, you still have several fertility levels. You can go to the next slide, please. So here you can see that certain peatland types are linked to different fertility levels, and we wanted to conduct a similar analysis as I just showed you regarding the tree species analysis. However, it is still a work in process. You can go to the next slides. It's still a work in process. We are now processing all data and looking at the results, so I cannot really show anything about that yet, but a preliminary analysis which was conducted, where we just quickly visually looked at how the fertility levels are distributed across a little area in Finland, and how that corresponds to certain a response in the total productivity VPP. You can see that a pattern is clearly visible. So we can say that certain fertility levels are linked with certain responses in total productivity. So this gives some potential, or this shows some potential for also using HR-VPPs for making a distinction in peatland habitat types. So if you go to the next slide, here I would like to just add some take-home messages. So in a conclusion, the HR-VPPs are definitely contributing to essential biodiversity variables, and particularly in making habitats mapping, such as the ecosystem structure. So it is an important predictor for habitat mapping, but we see that it's very depending on which type of habitat you want to map. So for forest types or forest habitat types, it is chosen to be quite an important predictor, but not so much for grassland or shrubs. Here we see that the leaf area index is more important. And also our analysis indeed shows that also the forest species can be distinguished from each other based on certain important HR-VPPs, which were shown to be, most importantly, the green upslope, the total productivity, the maximum value, and the amplitudes. And it's a bit more difficult to make that distinction between coniferous forest species, but it has a big potential for tree species in general. Now, for peatland types, and maybe also quite some other habitat types, we see that it is more difficult to just depend only on these HR-VPPs. We need some more information on the additional input variables that Bruno explained, such as the climate information, soil information, etc. Because these in peatlands you have more a grassy or a swampy environment, and this is not comparable to a forest habitat. So with this, I would like to conclude my part, and I will give back the word to Bruno.
Yeah, so I only have one slide before we finish this presentation, just for those who know it. So we have also a demo, at least the Python new data access script, which will be coming soon. So the link is there, so you can check at least in the course of next week. Probably it will be made available, where you can conduct a similar type of analysis as we did for the tree species in Germany, or whatever, at least where these different parameters are being used. So it uses the HR-VPP data sets, productivity, as well as the seasonal trajectories, if you really want to have the 10 daily data sets. And it will calculate over an administrative area. So we took the NUTS level 3, but okay, you can use any shapefile you want, and a time period with a specific filter, where you can either use Corine, for instance, for land cover, but you can also use, for instance, the forest type map to filter on specific forest types and conduct some analysis. And hereby, I think we want to conclude this part. So back to you, Amal.
Thank you very much, Bruno and Laurie, for your presentation. I will soon close as well the second poll and open the third one, and I can give the floor to Stefan.
Yes, I try to, I need to unmute myself, share my screen coming up in this, oops, wait a second, first share. Now you should see my screen, full screen mode. Good. Then, yeah, I would like to thank you all for the invitation to present the work of the EU Grassland Watch project. The work that I'm presenting is, let's say, has been compiled by myself and a colleague from GISA, Jan Misurec, who has helped me on the technical details, because he is in fact the one who is processing the data and working with the HR-VPP data in detail. What is the objective of the EU Grassland Watch project? It aims at providing an operational service for the provision of information on the status, the changes, and the pressures in Natura 2000 sites, and here in particular Natura 2000 sites which are dominated by grasslands. It is a follow-up of the Copernicus for Natura 2000 prototype project, in which we basically tested the technical feasibility of a number of things that we are rolling out now in a more operational approach. And as you can see here on the screen, the whole information will be presented in a web tool. So you can, let's say, select individual Natura 2000 sites. You can visualize the land cover information on it, but you can also visualize a number of what we call grassland products, which or indicators, which will give you information about the grassland surface, the change of grassland surface, and some other indicators also helping to identify, let's say, the condition of the grasslands. Because the whole background of the project is, of course, to support the European biodiversity strategy and all the information needs it has. As I said, it's focusing on grassland sites. We have selected from the Habitat Directive Annex 1 all habitat types that start with a 6. So all the grasslands. But in addition, we also have selected some additional sites with grassland characteristics, like some salt steppe or salt meadow and these kind of things. In general, grassland are sites of a high biodiversity interest because there's a multitude of habitats, let's say, that exist on grassland sites, but they also are, let's say, under high and diverse threats and pressures, and they and these threats and pressures actually range from overusing them to not using them enough. So overusing means you can have an intensification by either adding more fertilizer to increase the biomass production. You also have an intensification in terms of, let's say, a land use change to more arable land. Or you can have, let's say, the opposite. You can have a land abandonment. You are not using your site enough. You have shrub encroachment, you have bush development, you have land abandonment, so that people are stopping to produce any agricultural work. So all of that leads to, let's say, changes in the grasslands, and they can have unwanted effects, or let's say leading to what we see here on the result of the Article 17 reporting for the last reporting period from 2013 to 18, that actually 18% of the grassland habitat types are considered to be in a not good condition. But what is also more interesting is that the 35%, we have a lot of missing information. And this is a particular interest, of course, for the member states who are preparing the Article 17 reporting. They very often are lacking the quantitative spatial information to really make an assessment of the condition. Let's say, and our goal is that we would, with our tool, provide the member states with additional information to support their reporting efforts, and to provide them a bit more information, and to, let's say, reduce the gap of the 35% of unknown information. And on the other hand, of course, we have a second client, which is, let's say, mainly the European Commission. And they are more interested in the overall Habitat Directive compliance, seeing that the Natura 2000 sites are in a good condition and are not degrading, so that nothing is going in the wrong direction. Better, of course, if it goes in an increasing in a better direction. What are the highlights of the Grassland Watch project? I would say we have a very strong user involvement component. We have discussed with the users, with the user community, or which sites to be working on. We have discussed the nomenclature. We have been discussing the indicators with them. So what kind of information to provide. And also we are discussing with them the web platform. So which kind of functionality is desired. The second thing is, I think we are producing information for a lot of sites. I mean, there's about 27,000 sites, Natura 2000 sites in total. 24,000 of these sites are actually terrestrial sites. And we are, let's say, looking at roughly a bit over 16,000 terrestrial sites and processing and analyzing them with respect to changes in grasslands. And what I would say our unique selling point in the project is that we are actually providing a very, very long time series. I think that's an unprecedented thing that we are providing here. This is information ranging from 1994, basically when the Habitats Directive came into existence, until more or less today. So information in the tool currently is until 2022. We are updating that, and by the end of the project, it will be there until end of 25, maybe beginning of 26. The other highlight, I would say, we are not trying to classify grasslands like we have it traditionally in Korean land cover. You have a pasture, you have a meadow, you have a semi-natural grassland, but we are trying to describe the grasslands. We are trying to characterize the grasslands. So we actually try to tell what is the grassland type that we are looking at. So more from the biological perspective, and here we go to UNIS level 2 classes. Then we try to find out what is actually the management intensity on those sites. Are they being plowed? Are they being mowed? So and the last one is the grassland productivity that we are looking at. In order to achieve all that, we require quite a bit of data, and the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service here is providing us with, let's say, the big backbone of information that we are using. So of course we have the images, we have some of the high resolution layers, but in third place you see here already in the yellowish orange box the HR-VPP data set, which we are using and mainly using for identifying the grassland type and moreover the grassland management. So sorry, the grassland productivity. I looked at the wrong arrow here. So these are the highlighted by the little circles that you see here. Regarding the nomenclature, we have, let's say, a 3-level nomenclature. We first try to do or identify some overall general land cover classes, which is a little bit similar to the Korean land cover CLC plus backbone, and might even be further adapted to it. And then on the more on the right side, once we have identified the grassland mask, we are looking inside that mask into what is the type of the grassland we are looking at, and we have 7 types here. We are looking at the management of the particular site, which can be no management, intensive management, extensive management, being temporary grasslands or permanent grasslands, and also looking into the productivity, high or low biomass productivity. And the idea is that by combining, let's say, a grassland type with a management type and a productivity type, we can get an additional information out of it. So like if we look at all the elements highlighted here in red, that could be also be termed as a natural grassland. While if we would select a little bit different combination, we could identify semi-natural grasslands because there is a different management practice in the site going on. So how are we going to use the HR-VPP data set in this context? So as I said, in the first place where we use it for the grassland type, where among others, the HR-VPP helps us to differentiate, let's say, differences in the phenology and productivity, which are, let's say, typical for the different grassland type categories. So we get a first differentiation here. But we combine that, of course, with other vegetation indices, radar data, topography information. So where is actually the grassland located on a higher altitude in a valley? And of course, then we combine that further with other high-resolution data. And an output would look like that. So you can have different grassland types in different contexts. So there's an example from Spain on the left, France in the middle, and Hungary on the right side. Furthermore, as I said, for the productivity, it's even one of the key input data sets. And here we are using also what Bruno has already shown, the total productivity and the seasonal productivity parameters that are provided by the data set. We analyze a few more parameters, and in order to come up then with information on the productivity trend, in order to achieve some kind of a, let's say, indicator that tells us on a scale from 0 to 1 what is the productivity of a certain grassland over time. We are not only looking at this, let's say, for one moment in time, but we're actually looking at the temporal dimension, because it is, of course, interesting how the productivity is changing and changing between the years. We are not, I mean, we could always have a dry year or a very, let's say, productive, intensive, moist year or whatever. So we would get a lot of changes in that. So, but of course, overall, on the long term, we are interested in long-term deviations from the average, let's call it like that. And the users are interested in these 6-year Natura 2000 reporting cycles. So they have to report under the Article 17, under the Habitat Directive every 6 years. So the idea is to see, we have a 6-year cycle. What is the average, let's say, in that one? And where are we deviating from a certain average in a positive or in a negative direction, allowing to let's say, use that in order to classify the productivity state that we have. And that basically also already concludes my presentation. I wasn't sure how much I should actually go into all the technical details. I thought it was mainly more about how useful the data set is. For us, I would say the HR-VPP data set is a key data set in our processing chain. And the big advantage of the data set is that it is available within very short delays. As Bruno has pointed out, the annual products, they are available already in March of the next year. So even you said the vegetation period you look at goes until February. So in March, the data is available. So that is a key thing that for us is important, because many of the other Copernicus data sets currently still have a little bit longer delay. I know that is changing, and the more these delays are being shortened, the more interesting also they will be also for integration into our production chain. But I think the HR-VPP is one of the front runners for us to work with. And that's concluding my presentation. So I would like to say thank you on behalf of the consortium and all the partners that are also mentioned here on the slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for your presentation, and of course for all the previous presentations as well, which were very insightful. I think we can start our Q&A session. We do have some questions in the chat. So the first question would be, could you possibly determine if a sudden change in phenology is related to a disease or a parasitic plant on the host?
Yeah, I can take that one. It's a good question, at least. So I think detecting the change is possible using the phenology, but detecting the cause of the change, that's still something which has not been experienced, at least at this moment. Although there is a new just recently started project, which is called Objection Horizon Euro project, which will be looking at to detect at least the drivers of change. So this could be one of the drivers of change. And so it is possible, but we don't have experience, at least if exactly this diseases can be detected.
If I can quickly
Yeah,
add something as well. Yes, I think it's a very complex question because it's a complex context because just the occurrence of, for example, parasitic plant or an invasive species or a disease coming up can be related to other factors as well, such as changing climate conditions, maybe change in land cover or land use. So it can be quite a complex statistical analysis, I think, to differentiate or to really identify the main cause. So it will not be something that you can just by looking at phenological responses see directly, but you might need a bigger statistical analysis.
Thank you, Laurie and Bruno. The second question would be how far the differences in the observed HR-VPP parameters in peatlands and habitats could be attributed to, influenced by the local edaphic conditions.
I can maybe start for this one. So for edaphic conditions, that means I think related to soil rather than to climate. It will depend, I think, a bit on which type of habitats you are looking into, because there are some habitats such as the temperate forest, for example, where the phenological cycle is more determined by temperature. And it will depend also from species to species, I think, how much the soil conditions influence the phenological response, because you have some species that prefer a well-drained soil, some prefer a wetted soil, some prefer an acidic soil. So if you have enough soil information on a specific site and you have the HR-VPP response, then I think it is definitely possible to go deep into detail and see how changes in soil conditions are related to changes in the HR-VPP parameters that you can derive from the time series. When we look at peatlands, soil conditions are often related to water indices, so the water level in a soil. That's what also the case study that we were not able to conduct fully is actually trying to see how those soil conditions might influence the HR-VPP, because we were looking at different fertility levels between undrained and drained peatlands, and fertility in a peatland is also highly correlated with the carbon storage and the carbon storage in peatlands. So I think you can go very deep into detail and you can try to observe changes in HR-VPP parameters by looking at soil conditions. I think that's my conclusion.
Thank you, Laurie. If no one else has something to add, then we can move to the other question. So there are two questions quite similar, I'd say. So first one asking, are there additional resources such as a support system team available to assist users in navigating the documentation effectively? And the second one would be your posted videos and user manual have been helpful. I still have gaps in my understanding of using the products. Any hands-on workshops? So I think this is for Bruno.
Yeah, I can take that one. So yeah, I think there is a help desk. So I'll just put it in the chat at least. So if you need any product technical support, then you can always send it to Copernicus at EEA, blah, blah, blah. You can see it in the chat on that one. Like I already said, at least the product user manual is the entry document. So have a look at the product user manual. And then if you want to dive into specific details, then either you go to the ATBD for the algorithm, or you go to the validation report, which provides more information on the quality of the product. On the hands-on workshops, there are no hands-on workshops, although that if you go to the website again, there is this data access part, where a number of example scripts are provided together also with, I think we also had a couple of recordings before on the data access part, which explains a bit more how to access the data and use the data. So that are a couple of, let's say, entry points that you can use to get going. And if not, then just send a mail to the help desk and they will help you further with your question.
Thank you, Bruno. So we have another questions. How is grazing accounted for in the productivity estimates for grasslands?
That's a good question. We are in our analysis currently mainly looking to mowing and plowing, because mowing and plowing, I mean, we have a curve like Bruno has shown, and if the curve is suddenly dropping, we can probably attribute to that either a mowing event or a plowing event within the grassland. The grazing is mostly a more continuous or gradual process, so which is more difficult to grab. And it's actually one of the challenges that we also have been asked by our users, how we can look into it. But the grazing is, let's say it's difficult. We haven't, I think, fully under control how to do it, but we are discussing to maybe develop some kind of a specific use case, because we have the opportunity to have, let's say, limited use cases where we are diving deeper into certain questions. And the grazing question is certainly an issue we would like to dive in deeper, but it's so far, I would say, unfortunately, not fully part of the assessment.
All right. Thank you,
I
Stefan.
can just
yes.
add to that. I think the VPP parameters at least will not provide you that detail, because grazing is typically a slow process. So, and since we do kind of a curve fitting technique and we limit it to 2 seasons, so you will not exactly detect this grazing effect. Not attributed to grazing, I should say. Yeah.
The idea is to see if we have other information parameters which we can use in combination. Like the idea is if you see some kind of a trampling in certain areas, so that we try to combine things. But as you said, Bruno, I think it's not directly related to the curve that we have.
All right. Thanks a lot for your answer. And another question, can variations in HR-VPP metrics derived from time series analysis be used as indicators for the presence of climate microrefugia?
Well, so again, I think a complex but good question. I think we still have to take a lot of things into account. For example, if we just look at a case study, a small region, or a country, on country level, we need to know where is the climate change making certain regions or habitats not suitable for certain species again, and also in which direction are these habitats changing, so to which other kind of habitats. And then we would need to see and evaluate, is the HR-VPP response also different for these habitats and these new species that are occurring there. And if there's a clear change, I think it is possible, or my idea would be to check where are some expected HR-VPP responses still present, and could we then investigate further to identify these areas as climate microrefugia. But yeah, Bruno, do you have anything else you would like to add?
No, I think it's like you said, it's a complex issue. I think the only thing I want to add is, I think you also need to look at the time series length, because climate is, climate changes, where you want to look into, okay, what's kind of a local favorable climate is. Yeah, typically requires, most of the time it says, okay, you need at least 10 years. I think we are now at 8 years. So I think the data set only now becomes more and more kind of usable for these kind of analysis, which was not the case when the series is smaller.
All right, thank you both. Another question, this time for Stefan directly. Is the test for significance used to detect notable deviations from the expected grassland behavior?
And that's a question I would need to see if Jan from BSAT is here, because he is the one that actually is working with the data, because as I said, I'm not the technical specialist here or the technical details that in order to reply to this question. So I don't know, Jan, are you here?
If you're here, please raise your hand. Yes.
Yes, so now do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, nice. Well, as it was mentioned by Stefan, so this statistical analysis is, let's say, just some piece of statistics which, let's say, informs you whether the observed trend in productivity is statistically significant or not. But it has nothing to do directly with let's say, some direct comparison of expected and actual behavior of grassland. I would say that maybe better comparison provides the second part of the productivity analysis, when we compare actual productivity with, let's say, mean of the previous 6 seasons. And so in that case, we are comparing the actual status or actual productivity of grasslands with the mean of previous years, which could be, in very simple way, considered as something which describe, let's say, often or usual behavior of grassland in the certain site.
Thank you, Jan, for contributing. I think we can then go to the next question, which is more for me. So can you add the webinar recording? So I will add in the chat the link for the YouTube playlist, so you have all the webinars there. And we still have other questions. How is the intensity of grassland classified? Is there reference data, for example, number of mowing events available?
Yes. I mean, there the idea is that we have information about the number of mowing events, at least probably something like 1, 2, 3, more than 3 or whatever. That's the idea to provide this type of information.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And then we can move on. So is productivity provided summed up per year or also in 10-day steps looking back?
Yeah, so I can take that question. So it's per year. So it's basically the productivity is currently defined as the what we call the area under the curve. Either the season when you cut off between the start of season and the end of season, so that's a seasonal productivity, or throughout the entire year where you also take the base level. So if there's still some greenness across the full year available, and that's how the productivity is calculated at a yearly basis. Like I said, I think in the beginning of the presentation, in the future version, so in the upcoming years, the idea is also to add some more productivity variables like GPP and NPP and biophysical metrics. And there will be also 10 daily products, which will, or seasonal trajectories, like we call it, which will provide that kind of information. So not now, but it's coming.
Thanks. We still have other questions, more about grazing. I guess it's an important topic. So grazing influences the biomass and therefore the productivity parameters. Therefore, it should be used carefully as a discriminator for different grassland types. I guess this is more of a comment. Do you have anything else to say about this?
No, not much, but I can take it together with the other comment above. I mean, yes, we are aware of it, and we should also be clear that currently we are not really looking at grazing in the project. We are looking at mowing and plowing as let's say, management intensity issues. As I said, we will probably try to identify how we could map grazing, but that would be a use case that still needs to be developed. So the current management practices, let's say, that we are looking at related to that is much more mowing and plowing and not grazing. Even though that we know it's an important topic, as we can see here, but it's also a very difficult topic to map from space.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
I think
Stefan.
indeed the mowing and the plowing events, they are more more abrupt compared to the
Yeah.
grazing, which is more a slow process, and that's always more difficult to map.
Yeah, thanks. We do have another question. So did you plan on integrating any in situ observations into the EUGW platform from site managers, for example, to give a better picture of grassland degradation?
That's also one of the long-term goals. For the moment, we are currently, let's say, providing information to the site managers and to the users of the tool. The idea would be on the longer term to have some kind of a mutual exchange so that people are also able to upload information, but that requires a different functionality of the tool. It requires a bit of quality checking of what is uploaded, how to make the data available, what is data privacy, and these kind of things. So also that one is planned to be addressed probably in a dedicated use case, but not on the full scale of all the sites, but with a much more limited scale.
All right, thanks a lot. And then I think this is related to what you also have answered before. So the question is, how do you detect grazing and differentiate between mowing and grazing, especially mixed systems? 1 minus 2 times mowed and then grazed, I guess.
Like I said, not at all.
Yeah.
We are not looking at grazing at the moment.
Yeah. And the last question for this webinar, can you use Grassland Watch to measure or check the effectiveness of different CAP measures like GAEC 9?
The GAEC 9 is the banning of plowing, let's say, if I remember correctly, in grasslands. Yes, that's one of the ideas. I mean, it's not necessarily meant to, let's say, check the cut policy, but it is at least that's one of the parameters, let's say, that would lead to intensification of the site, which might be an unwanted step to do. So indirectly, yes, information would be there.
All right. Well, we have reached the end of our questions. I guess there are no more coming, and we reach also the end of the webinar. I will add here in the chat the mailbox that you can use to contact us if you need anything about these webinars. You also have the link for the EEA YouTube playlist with all the videos recorded. This one will be coming soon on the platform. I would like to thank everyone, the audience joining us today, and for this last webinar of the HR-VPP series. And thank you very much also for the panelists and their insightful presentations. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hey,
Bye-bye.
thanks.
Goodbye.